disrupting to their equilibrium, and we need to be conscious of that.
Yeah, so like, does anyone on the panel have any strategies or phrasing or questioning, just strategies individuals could use to guide conversations to be enlightening and coming to an equal ground?
Well,
Rob?
I'll tie back to, when I said, when you're having these conversations or doing this type of work, it starts with you first. So where are you with all of this? Because you have to know you will run into a lot of discomfort from others. So where are you with this? Where are you with your anger? Where are you with your love? I'm a 7 habits facilitator, and one of the habits is seek first to understand, then to be understood, to Margot's point. A lot of people are waiting for the opportunity to practice empathy. It's right now. And the practice of empathy for me is very simple. Am I willing to step out of my narrative, my story, my worldview, to fully engage with you and say, I don't understand why you feel the way you do, but I really would like to understand. I'm not here to judge. I'm not here to say you're right, you're wrong. I just want to understand. Can we do that? We don't have to agree, but I think we should always be respectful. So to me, it starts when you don't want a strategy, it starts with self. Where are you with all of this? Where is your anger in all of this? Because you will be triggered as well, because you got to remember, we're not operating in a silo. We're a part of this. Last night, I was listening to Martin Luther King's, I've been to the mountaintop speech again. I've listened to it many times. If you ever listen to it, you realize what they were going through in that time is no different than today. The same things we're going through. So I'm listening to him and he's going, there's something going on in our world. America is sick, change is here. Well, we could say the same thing today. And Nagan, what's going on in the southern states is actually going on here in Canada as well, in Toronto and other places. So my thing is, the biggest strategy is individually start with yourself. Where are you with these energies that we're feeling today? Because you yourself will get triggered. I get triggered. I just don't give in to them anymore, because when I first saw the George Floyd video, you gotta remember, I'm a Black man. I don't peel this off at night. And my conditioning is no different than many of you. So when I first saw it, it does trigger you. But I also stop myself and go, what are you getting triggered about? I constantly question and look at myself. So when I'm involved in conversation, particularly these types of conversation, we can interject, we can free flow, but I really want to understand why you're feeling the way you do, because I don't get it. And just because I don't get it doesn't mean that you're wrong or you're right. I just need to understand. And I think a lot of times we confuse ignorance and stupidity. Ignorance says, I don't know, but I may want to know. Stupid says, I don't know, and I don't care that I know. And those people, you just have to leave them alone.
What if they're the president of the United States? I mean, I think it's the challenge is that I didn't mean to interrupt you there, Raul, but the challenge is that what Margot spoke about directly was that it's not easy to just simply cast away people who are in positions of power. And so when we're getting back to talking about JCI, I mean, there are elements of power within the organization that we're thinking about, and that are really hard questions. And I completely agree, Raul, that Martin Luther King is an essential way to think about the ways that we engage with violence, or the ways that we engage with issues of racial conversations. But we also need a Malcolm X. You also need a Malcolm X to at times force the conversation in a non-violent means, in a way in which if that conversation does end, the power dynamics don't stop as well. So it's worth thinking about in terms of thinking about what drove Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, and it was love. And you talked about that, Raul, and we've all kind of touched upon the issue of love. I like many people come from an interracial family, And so a large segment of my family is white and very well off, very privileged, live in the richest area of the country, Alberta. And one of the things is, as a person who's been, organized marches in the streets against many resource projects with Indigenous communities, one of the things that one of my aunts asked me one time, we were at Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving is supposed to be the time of family. And she says, why don't you people stop protesting and complaining all the time? And I'm like, I'm your people. Like, there's no you people here. I am only your people. There's no you people. And so the element of treaty is really a guiding force here, because what Indigenous peoples developed for thousands of years was the notion of family making. And that when you came together to make a commitment, or what we would call a treaty, you would agree to become family. You would agree to never walk away from one another, even if you disagreed, and that you'd be together forever. And that means that love must guide that relationship. And love is sometimes walking away, absolutely, especially if it's an abusive relationship, like with the president of the United States, but realizing that you're still going to be in that tomorrow. Therefore, what is it that you can do in order to act in a loving way, not in a passive way, but in an active, loving way, in order to speak and to engage. And so with my aunt, is what I said was, I said, Auntie, I am your nephew. I am not you people. Mm-hmm. And most importantly, I love you with all of my heart. And I want to explain to you why it is that this issue is so passionate for Indigenous people, which are your relatives too. And as we begin to have that conversation, she got very uncomfortable. But now whenever she watches something on the news, she just phones me and she says, I don't really understand this situation. Can you just explain this to me? Mm-hmm. And because she's my auntie, I'm happy to do that.
To add to your point, I remember Malcolm X was very militant at the beginning, but after his first pilgrimage, he had a shift. It's not just about love. It's got to be about love and justice. Yeah, it has to be about love and justice. I'm a very peaceful spiritual man, and I think part of what's going on in the world is there's almost a pushback. We've moved away so much from spirituality, and I'm not talking religion. A sense of truly understanding ourselves in this great big world, the insignificance of us, the significance of us, but more spirituality in regards to how we connect with each other. So as much as I am a supporter and very much admire Martin Luther King, I also do like Malcolm X, but I like the Malcolm X who came back after his first pilgrimage, and he didn't soften, he added to his worldview, because then he started understanding there were other Muslims that didn't look like him, that looked like what he was fighting back where he came from. So I think there's a balance, and that's one of the things, there's a balance and a patience that's required with all of this, because it takes time, and change takes time. I think one of the biggest things that we can do is, when I'm talking with people and speaking with people, I'm just hoping to plant a seed in them. It's kind of like what you did with your auntie. You planted a seed that invited her to look at things differently, not necessarily agree with it, but to look at it differently, and then do what? Pick up the phone and go, hey nephew, I don't get this. You planted a seed. And I think that's one of the greatest things that we can do. It's one of the strategies. When I plant seeds, I always tell people, if you vibe with what I'm saying, don't just take it because I say so. Take it, go away and explore it. Do some research around it. Make it your own. There's pieces of it you will like, the other pieces let go. I think we just need to plant seeds and then help germinate those seeds when people come to us and say, I don't understand.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that. Obviously, the last few months have been a little rough as a Black person. And it's really important to be open and to be able to ask questions. So when people came to me and they asked me, what is your experience as a Black Canadian? I'm happy to have those conversations with them, because depending on your personal experience and your personal background and who your friends are, you may not have ever seen that underbelly. And just because you'd have no personal experience of it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. Walking in
It's 11 hours.
in a, in this skin in a predominantly white society, it comes with some little issues that, and if I came in a different frame or a different gender, that I wouldn't have to experience, just as if someone who's blind, I wouldn't know what challenges they face every day just trying to get around. And that's, again, the importance of diversity, like being able to get these different perspectives from different people. And yeah, those conversations with family members, especially older ones, can be difficult. I mean, even speaking to my father, who was in his 20s in the 60s, can be difficult because he's experienced certain things that, he's still, I wouldn't say angry about, but it's really shaped his worldview. And it's certain things that I have never had to experience on that level. And I'm happy about that. So just like my father has certain experiences that shaped his worldview, yeah, you're going to have your Nana maybe have some experiences, some things that they've been taught that don't sit well with you, but it's also not something that you should ignore, but just be open to what their experience was and what the history is telling you as well. So
Right.
yeah.
So with racial injustice happening from both sides of our borders, is there a way, and obviously frustration and maybe of what's occurring in the United States, is there a way for leadership in Canada to step up and take action now? Margot, do you have thoughts on this?
Well, I think one of the things they're doing is where we are right now, is having open discussions that are available to everyone and outside of our organization. And I think you have to get involved. You have to be very purposeful. And I think that word is very important. Like, you have to make that a goal. You have to make that ingrained as part of everything that you do. Because it's one thing about diversity and inclusion. Once you make it an initiative, it's already failed. Because diversity and inclusion and equity shouldn't be initiatives. These should be things that are intertwined into everything that you do. So I think just getting out there, helping people have those uncomfortable conversations, and that we're starting here on this panel, and taking it into the communities and helping facilitate their chapters doing these things in their communities. Just really being the leader and the facilitators of just starting those conversations and getting people together in safe spaces that they can have these conversations and not feel attacked and not feel like they're going to come in and we're going to blame you and you're automatically wrong, because that's not the purpose. The purpose is to see from others' perspectives and hopefully re-educate ourselves and heal a little bit of what's been going on in our hearts and in our spirits and in our world. And it starts little by little with communities, panels. So I think they've started it off on a great note with having this discussion, but taking it down to the smallest block of that into the chapters and the communities, and making sure their leadership has a great understanding of what diversity, inclusion, equity, and belonging, what that looks like as well. So it may be that you take time to make sure your leadership is trained and well-versed and understands it, so they can disseminate that to their members and into the community, because it really starts internally, but we need to also turn outward as well.
We have yes, Ralph?
I just, like I said, I'll go back to patience. You know, we're quick to jump to solutions or wanting solutions. We're doing it right now. We're having the conversations, and I think we need to be patient with having the conversation, because it's not just having one conversation or even two. It's going to be an ongoing conversation. There will come a time where we do have to go to action, and even in the conversation we will. But I think we also have to be patient in having the conversation. Sometimes when we've had the conversation once. Once is not enough. We need to have it multiple times and have that patience with ourselves and with others to keep having the conversation, knowing that the more we talk, every time we speak, hopefully we learn something different from every conversation that will keep moving us forward. So there's a patience, a managed patience, not a blind patience, that's required with this. You know, so as far as leadership, as the Canadian leadership, a government can only do so much. I put the leadership question back to the people. You know, to Nagan's point, when you talked about how do you explain Trump, Trump is just a reflection of the people, of where we are today. He didn't just show up, right? Canada, the US, the G20, all of these countries in the world came out of colonization. The colonizers before came from the past, the Roman, the Greek, the Ottoman empires. We keep building upon our history. And I think it's important that where we are today, I think Margot's touched on it, is not to shame people, but it's to help to understand and have the conversation, and saying, I know we're going to have multiple conversations, because we're not going to solve anything more than likely in a 1 hour or 2 hour conversation. But are you willing to have an ongoing conversation individually? Are you willing as a collective to keep having these conversations? Because right now, where we are today, is the opportunity for us to really understand where we came from, how we got to where we are. That will help us to determine where we want to go. So.
Right. So what are some hurdles organizations like JCI have had in regards to engaging minorities in our communities, and what can we do to engage them? Natasha, could I ask you that question?
Sure. I think it comes down to, again, do our chapters and our organizations reflect that community? So if it's a predominantly white organization going into a more marginalized community, are we going in there to really, one, earn trust, build a relationship? Or are we going in there, hey, we're going to save you, or hey, we're checking a box? That's really, we don't want to go in with that attitude. I think, again, really coming in from a place of, I don't know if curiosity is the right word, but a place of wanting to learn. I think a place from really understanding that there may be trust that we have to earn with certain groups before we could do any work, really build a relationship. So it's almost like kind of getting back to basics. But again, it's been reiterated a few times throughout this panel. It's looking at our chapters to see if we are really being inclusive. And I know sometimes that could be, whether it's hard to say or hard to hear as JCIs, because we are an international organization, and anyone who's gone to conferences and we meet people around the world, and it's almost like an instant family, and we're very welcoming. And then to come back into our own communities and think, and maybe see that, you know what, our chapter doesn't reflect all the groups within our community, and maybe people don't feel welcome, to the point of what Alice said, like, where, am I the only Black face in my chapter? So it's a little bit of both, where we have to really do that work internally. And then if we're going out to to communities or groups coming from a place of where we may have to earn trust and build a relationship.
Alice, do you have thoughts on the hurdles that we've maybe had or and solutions to those with that focus?
I think, I mean, right now we are having trouble with recruitment in Canada. It's a fact. And I think we need to be more open about what activities we're doing, the people we're attracting. Because again, diversity isn't just about, you know, skin color or cultural background. It's, you know, it's about sexual orientation. It's about physical ability. And really, the organization has to be welcoming. It has to not be cliquey when someone shows up off the street, you know. I remember exactly the first person who spoke to me at my first JCI event. And if she hadn't been as friendly as she was, I'm not sure I would have stayed, you know, just again, feeling like I was the only person of color there at the time. And if it wasn't an international organization, I'm not sure I would have stayed either. And I know that's a difficult thing to say because I love this organization, but yeah, it's sometimes tiring to be the only person that's different. And I mean, that's nobody's fault. It's just the way it is. So yeah, those are my thoughts on that. It's really about organizational culture. It's about making it clear that no matter what your financial background, your educational background, that you have a place in this organization, that you don't have to own your own business. You know, you can be blue collar or pink collar and benefit and be welcome in this organization. And I don't think that's always the perception, which is a shame because, you know, the tools and the courses and all those learning opportunities, you know, to take back to your community. It's really a shame that just because we don't reflect our values, that some people might find that they don't belong. So those are my thoughts.
Yes, Raul. Oh, and you're on mute, Raul.
Oh, sorry. Okay. One of the things I would like to suggest to the panel is, you know, we talk about people of color and marginal communities and minorities. I am not a minority. I am a minority from a demographic standpoint, but I'm not a minority in the way we use that word. So I think there's a mindset with JCI and other organizations. We're going into minority or I think we need to stop using languaging like that as well. We talk about people of color and then there's white, and that's still segregation. It's either we're all people of color or we just go back to individually using black, white, whatever colors. So there's a mindset that we really need to be cognitive of. A lot of organizations like JCI with that mindset, there's almost a savior mentality that almost worms its way through without people even being conscious of it. So I think you really, once again, go back and do that internal work with JCI. When we talk this way, what do we really mean? What are we saying? And to Alice's point, you know, you really need to look at your creed. Is it current? Does it match where our membership is today? I understand it was created. Just like Canada and the US came out of people want to say white supremacy thinking. I don't say white supremacy thinking. I just say thinking of their day. There's a danger that we keep bringing our morals of today and putting it on the past, like somehow we're doing something better and different than the past. So I think we really need to be cognitive of our terminology, of how we use words. When we talk about sensitivity with the outside world, we need to be cognitive internally as well, because as I sit here at 11:15 specific standard time, I'm not oppressed, I'm not marginalized, and I'm not a minority, period.
And Raul, I mean, that's actually a question being asked in the Q&A was about our creed for JCI, which is, it's arguably doesn't include diversity and inclusion. And so the question was, you know, how does an organization like JCI make that a priority to update that or work through it for our values, our value statement?
Yeah, well, it sounds like I said before, you need to put together a committee and really examine where JCI is today, whether it's JCI Canada, JCI International, JCI Edmonton, whatever your chapter is, and go, do these value statements really reflect where we are today? How do they link to the national organization? How do they link to the global organization? And how are they reflecting where we are today? Because maybe you're still operating under an old mindset that is still kind of muddying the waters. So, you know, inclusion and diversity may not have been part of the consciousness when it was created. It is not wrong, it is just what was. What are we to learn from it? Well, it wasn't part of it. So now, if our creed is not current day and serving us, then it's upon us to come up with a new creed, a new vision, new values, new goals, all these things. So I think it's important to put forth an internal an internal group that truly reflects membership, where you can come together and have those things and then go back and report back to membership. But if your creed isn't reflecting you today, you need to change it.
Can I add so I'm not a JCI member, but I've been interacting with JCI for a number of years through Natasha, who's brought me out to JCI Winnipeg. I've helped out with JCI events and so on. One of the challenges is that when you are a racialized person, when you are an LGBTQ person, or a person who, you know, comes in and you are in a group that's been historically marginalized, for example, and you enter into that conversation in a chapter, in an organization, in a committee. Most oftentimes what happens is you are expected to do 3 times the work as everybody else. And what that means is you're a committee member, you're also there to enact and represent that group or a set of groups or the diversity opinion. And then third is you're often expected to be the spokesperson on behalf of that group. So I think some of the challenges when we were talking about the obstacles that we would face is that when there's a person who comes into a chapter or a group, you might be putting at times unwanted expectations on that person, which then may turn them away. And so that is something I think we're thinking about in terms of having those diversity inclusion initiatives, or whatever you might call it. And the other challenge is I think that the outcome of the organization, if it is still the same outcome and expectation, meaning the delivery model results in the same kind of person that there was from 10 years ago, same training, same certificate, same body of work that goes into it. The problem is that has most often benefited people from 1 or 2 or 3 groups in the past. Therefore, what you're expecting is you're expecting that person who doesn't wish to be the same and doesn't want to be a Canadian, doesn't want to be a person from the same as the other people within the group, but wants to maintain their difference, maintain their sovereignty, and particularly, most Indigenous peoples do not want to be Canadian. They want to be recognized as a member of those Indigenous communities in which they are in partnership with Canada. So there's no interest in being same, or I can say enacting sovereignty, and I think what Raul's saying is we would call it enacting sovereignty. Act sovereign. Don't feel that you need recognition for your sovereignty. Act sovereign. Act as an independent person from an independent nation, and then therefore things will happen. The problem, of course, is that if I said, okay, I'm a First Nations person, Anishinaabe person, and I drive about an hour and a half from here, there's guys with guns who will tell me, no, you're Canadian. So power has to come into it, and power has to be a part of those conversations. In which you bring in people from diverse communities. Can't just act like it's not there. You've got to enact the issues of power within the organization, but also when people come into the organization, ask them, what is it that they hope to get out of it? And then have multiple voices as a part of that initiative, not just from that group, that so-called diversity group. In order to that, so that they're doing the heavy lifting for all of everybody else in the organization, because what may happen, not always, but what may happen is the rest of the organization will sort of go, well, that's the committee, they'll take care of this for us. And so the hope is that that would, you know, go through the entire elements of every aspect of the organization. So you have to have an element, and that's where the discussions around power come into play.
Right. Well, and Corey and Margot, I'm going to pose this question to you guys. And Corey, I'll have you start. But what are some projects, event ideas, or initiatives that JCI chapters can organize and collaborate with different groups of diversity in order to start kind of the wheels turning of getting in, being more inclusive?
Well, you know, when it comes to, so when it comes to, you know, partnering with different organizations, one, you know, do your research on those organizations and know what they stand for. Do your research on the different activities that they go, you know, that they have had, and just really understand those organizations before you impose yourself onto them. Like, hey, let's do this, because usually when that happens, it's like, okay, well, why are you, you know, doing that? Why would you want to do that? So again, it's establishing those relationships, understanding, you know, the organization. Just like I said earlier, it's, you know, understanding the individual, where they're coming from. And then, you know, I know we've done this in my past in my church. I am a member of a predominantly Black church, where my pastor, he is, you know, has relationships with all different types of pastors. And every once in a while, we would do like a road trip where our church would go to their church, just so that, you know, we can have service with them and engage with their congregation. And then the next Sunday, that church will come to our church to see what we do. What is the gospel about? How do we, you know, praise God? You know, so it's a back and forth, and that's how you can engage with one another and truly start to trust each other and the organizations, because it's all about trust. Once you trust someone, once you really understand, you know, where they're coming from, and they understand where you're coming from, then you can use your power of influence to try, you know, to engage with them, so that you can then, you know, move forward. So I say, you know, again, from someone from the outside looking in, really understanding where they're coming from, really understanding the organization, and then, you know, sharing the, you know, spotlight together.
Yeah, just building upon what Corey said, because you definitely, before you go in, it's like, oh, we have this great idea and we want to do this with you, and you've never talked to this group before, you're going to get a weird look, because then you're going to go to different people and they're going to feel like you're using them to further your agenda. And that's not, it can't be about that. It has to be a genuine interest and a symbiotic relationship, that this benefits us both, that this brings something to us both if we're going to collaborate and do these things with different groups. So Corey is absolutely right. You need to do groundwork with organizations before we present these big ideas of different events and projects that we want to do with them. You have to build these relationships. And then as we get into project ideas and things like that, I think really the sky is the limit.
True.
to whatever works for where you are. You know, one of my favorite parts about going to these international events or global village, I love to see everybody in the same room with all their representation. Who says you can't do your own global village there in your community and partner with so many different other organizations, not just one, to get this as a big event that you're a part of? So there's a lot of representation in one space that everybody can just get as much information as they like. They can kind of pick and choose. I really think there's not a limit on things you can do. And I also think that you can take something as simple as a social and make that something that is very diverse and very collaborative as far as diversity, if it's welcoming to all people. So I think you just have to be purposeful in making sure that those relationships are built and that you're doing things and you're planning things always with diversity inclusion in mind. Because then it's not that we have to be so purposeful all the time. It's that we're doing this with almost everything that we put out and that we do.
Right.
And also, just to kind of piggyback real quick, just to let everybody know that it's going to take time. It's not going to happen with just one phone call or just one social. It's going to take time. Just like when you're dating, it takes time to get to know someone. You don't get married after that first date. So once you start establishing that relationship, and in time, the transformation will come, and then you can move forward with all those.
Corey, I just want to ask you, or maybe I'll ask the panel a question, because if you remember, we talked about, I don't know, almost an hour ago now, we talked about how young people coming into an organization want fast change, and they want change that, so I wonder if there's a tension there between, saying, oh, well, racial change, diversity takes time, patience, but yet young people, I think, I mean, if you just look at the ways, for example, statues are being torn down. Nobody wants to wait for that conversation to take place involving statues. Right now in Canada, there's a huge conversation around Sir John A. Macdonald as the perpetrator of genocide on the prairies against women and children and communities. I myself have spoken a lot, I've written columns on the issue. People don't want to wait any longer involving, worrying about people's feelings when it comes to Sir John A. Macdonald. It's just a matter of, the statue's coming down today, and it's coming down today, and we're tearing it down today. And we really don't care about what happens tomorrow because we just know that tomorrow, no matter what, will be better than today. So what do you think about that kind of, if we say to young people coming into JCI, we'll be patient, there's going to be multiple conversations, we're going to do this over a period of time. How do you handle that tension? Just it's an idea that's popped in my head about 3 times now.
Well, I think also too, there's opportunity to partner with people when things that are already being established that you become a part of if you haven't been a part of it before. And I think you also have to be very careful about what can be done right now. There's lots of things that can be done right now and don't have to have a long conversation. Like, we need people to register to vote in, especially in the USA right now. You need to be registered right now. That's not something that you have to wait and have a relationship with someone to do. I think you have to look at what can be done right now and what is going to need those relationships. But I think in anything you do, you still have to make sure that you're doing it in a way that people see that you're serious, that you're not just jumping on something because it's a buzzword right now or because it's popular right now. There has to be genuine intent in everything, and whether we're going to get this voter drive together for tomorrow, or you're going to plan a big event with another organization 2 months from now. It really needs to be genuine. And I think that's one thing that young people right now are looking for, because from those I have talked to, they feel like a lot of things are not genuine, that they're being placated, and you have to take them seriously and meet them where they are right now. And they're ready for change. You're very much right about that. But I think they really want to be heard and know that they're being taken seriously as well.
I used a term earlier called managed patience, and it's like managing a portfolio. You have low, medium, high yield. There are things that you can do right now. So when you get together with the younger, to Nagan's point, to the younger generation. There's things that we can do right now. Tomorrow, go register for vote. And then there are medium things that will take some planning, and then there's long term. So I think I used that term earlier. When I talk about patients, I'm not just talking about blind patients. It's a managed patients, and this is where the elders like myself, you know, the old gray elephant in the room, can help with bringing some of that guidance to the younger ones, because I see it here in Kelowna as well. They want it now, and then sometimes I go, there's some things you can have now, but there's some things you need to pull back, because have you thought it through fully what the end result, what the measurables are going to be? So there's a balance. It's not one thing or the other. There's a balance that's required, that there's going to be immediate action. There's going to be some action that, some initiatives that's going to take a lot more time, and then some actions is just a long-term vision. But there's a balance, and I think we need to communicate that. And I also think one of the things JCI can do, I believe, you know, as an ex-football coach, I believe in shared experiences. When you have your meetings, take your meetings out of your comfort zone and go into these communities that you normally don't go into. Have your socials in these communities that you don't normally do. Now, I can't remember who said it, but do your due diligence in regards to where you're going. Make sure people are safe, but step out of your own comfort. Hold your meetings in these communities that would never, ever have these types of gatherings and social events. So there's ways to reach out to show people we're not just here to talk it, we're here to walk it. And don't just do it once. So.
That's very true. And I was just, this is a really great segue, because we've talked a lot about what we as an organization can do. So I'd like to kind of chat more and now kind of close this down into what can individual members of JCI do, and also supporting the action items of potential new younger members and the actions that they can do, knowing that they're wanting to probably come in and just like start taking immediate action. So where can we kind of have that balance and meet in the middle? And so what does on an individual basis and change beginning via an individual, where does that fall within this space?
Well, I would say, are you truly being inclusive in your own circle? Is your circle truly inclusive and diverse? And I don't necessarily mean in ethnicity or skin color, but in thought, in conversations. You could be all white, but what conversations are you having? Are you talking about these topics of today? And then how are you challenging your circle to be more inclusive in its practice, in its daily life, in its profession, and everything that it do? So I think, you know, we can't just look at the external. What are we doing within our own world to truly be inclusive?
We're a leadership organization, and a key thing about leadership, or a key quality, is accountability. And so we really need to hold ourselves, and it's further to Raul's point, like really hold ourselves accountable in terms of exactly what he said, where we're not being inclusive. Perhaps, you know, whether it is our white fragility that is getting in the way, if we have been doing microaggressions, things like that. And I get that it's hard to look at ourselves that way. You know, as JCs, we like to do good work and, you know, meet people around the world and everything, but really, you know, being accountable. We talk about how change begins with me and about personal growth, really taking a hard look at ourselves and seeing where there could be unconscious bias. Seeing where there has been unconscious bias. Where do we need to unlearn? Where do we need to learn better so we can then do better? I think there's, you know, additional everyday things that we can do that can shift. You know, even if you're looking at your social media feed and your Instagram and you're curating content and different accounts that you're following, even if it's simple as wellness, is it generally your white blonde people that are in the wellness industry that you're following, or is it a more diverse community? even little things like that. We have an amazing panel here that can speak more to than just diversity inclusion. You have a poet, you have writers, you have people who can speak about leadership. So we should be inviting these individuals to talk more than just about diversity.
Right. Oh gosh. Alice, are we building a culture now where people can be held accountable when being exclusive?
I still feel like Canada, in a lot of respects, feels above it all. And we really, really shouldn't. We've had our own really ugly parts of our history, a lot of things that are still going on today. Land rights coming first to mind. Also migrant workers being exploited. And I know it's really hard to look in the mirror and see all these marks on Canada's history and its present, but without understanding those marks, you can't empathize with other people's feelings about their identity, whether that's the Japanese internment camps, whether it's the Ukrainian internment camps. Not understanding the background to our present is problematic. And it puts us in a position where we're very likely to make the same mistakes again. So I don't think there's an easy answer for that at all.
Right. And Nigan, your thoughts on the current culture of accountability?
Well, like I said before, I'm not a direct involved. I haven't been to a JCI international gathering, so I really only have the local knowledge of the organization. But my question to you, every JCI member, I think, is what do you expect? What do you know? And what do you hope every other JCI member looks like, thinks like, acts like, is in relationship with? Because you're all in this organization together. Therefore, if you're interested and engaged in a process in which you want, this is an importance, and I keep seeing in the chat, for example, everybody saying diversity and inclusion is a major tenet of the organization, and so on and so forth. If that's the case, then you have to face the reality that not every JCI member should be expected to act the same, think the same, speak the same, or have the same outcome. That means that an organization that's truly inclusive and diverse has different and inclusive expectations for their members, deliverables for their members, programming for their members. And this is critical to understand. Like when I was a kid, we used to have to sing God Save the Queen at the end of the day for school. And so, you know, you'd be at the end of the day, and Alice, I see Alice laughing over there, kind of going, you probably had to do this as well, right? So at the end of the day, God Save the Queen plays on the intercom. We all have to stand up. For many people, that's like, oh, we're acknowledging our relationship with the crown. For an Indigenous person, that is acknowledging genocide. You are celebrating genocide. You are recognizing an ongoing genocide that's happening, not yesterday, not 100 years ago, today in the classroom, that I am recognizing that this random person with the crown in the middle of nowhere has some kind of role in my life. And not only is it a way of recognizing that, but it was also a celebration of it. And that's, you know, where statues come in, sports teams, and all this kind of celebrations of violence that takes place within a culture and a community. So, for example, I would look at, if I was looking at a chapter, for example, and saying to yourself, I think all those ideas that have been passed on previously, which is, are we holding meetings in communities in which we don't? Are we interacting with communities in which we don't? But probably the most important thing is, what are we doing right now in this meeting today that is a celebration or indicative, a product of the history in which we come from? And is that the history that we want to keep continuing to celebrate within the everyday work of the organization? For instance, what are the values of the organization? And I'll just use capitalism as an example. The biggest damage that has been done on Indigenous communities has been an ongoing genocide based in capitalism, which is the extraction of resources and the theft of lands. 99% of Canada stolen Indigenous land for the purposes distinctly of genociding Indigenous peoples. So, if we're celebrating capitalist values, meaning owning businesses, for example, that will disenfranchise Indigenous people. Therefore, these are all ideas just worth thinking about as we set up our programming, who we're appealing to, and then what are the outcomes of our deliverables in our organization.
Right. So with that all said, do you, here's the question, do you have hope for Gen Z and the next generation? And does something feel different about these current movements that Gen Z is backing and behind, and what our future looks like, just culturally in general and in JCI?
Yeah, I definitely do. I think this generation is saying, okay, Martin Luther King talked about this how many years ago, and we're still talking about this and living this way, to their points of aggression. We want this now. You've raised us to think differently, to see the world differently, and we've grown up, and now you're still practicing. And I think that's the impatience. This generation is saying, we don't want this capitalistic way of living anymore. We don't want this lack of dehumanizing that we've continued to practice to this day. To Nagan's point, I remember when I became a Canadian citizen and I had to pledge allegiance to the Queen. I didn't say those words. I actually pledged allegiance to the people of Canada, not to the Queen. So I think this generation is just saying, we are fed up and we're tired and we want something different. When you asked earlier about accountability, how do we hold people accountable? When people face racial incidents, they're afraid to come forward because they don't want to be shamed. They don't want to lose their job, and they don't trust that they're going to get justice. So we need to look at our judicial system, or in regards to how do we deal with these issues. It's not just a one-time thing, but this generation is saying enough. We need to look at, how we're living from an economic standpoint, from governance. Is our government still working the way the people want? We have to look at our judicial system. We need to look at healthcare, mental health, and all these things. We need to look at education, finance, all of it. And in regards to, there's an opportunity that this generation is saying, I understand what you've done, but it's not what we want. We do not want to live life this way, to feel so disconnected, to feel that it's all about money and nothing else. And I think that's the opportunity that this generation is really pushing forth.
Corey, you got...
I totally 1,000% agree. I'm very hopeful for what is happening. And I'm very proud of this generation as well, because, I'm with my generation, we started seeing things that were happening. I know for me, when I was younger, I first saw the Rodney King thing. That was the big thing for me. And I'm like, oh my gosh, what's going on? And then now, because of social media, and you're starting to see it over and over and over again. But this generation here, like Ross said, it's enough. Enough is enough. And even in my community out here, when it came to protests and boycotts, I would drive through and I'll see the crowd outside, and it was mostly white people. And that really surprised me. But also it made me feel like this is different. And it has happened all across the world. How people, for whatever reason, George, and we see this with George Floyd's daughter has gone viral when she said, "My daddy changed the world." Literally, he did change that. This moment changed the world. And so I'm very hopeful. So when I say it's going to take time, this generation here and the generation after them, that's where the change is happening. And that's when we will, if we could fast forward into time years from now and look back, I believe there's going to be a huge change. And those questions that you're asking us now, how can JCI make a change right now? And you're doing it right now by having this conversation today on this platform. This is the beginning. And then what's going to happen, because of your passion and JCI's passion of wanting to have these types of conversations, that's going to attract the generation right now, because we are having a sincere conversation about what's going on. And they will see this on Facebook, on IG, and say, I want to be a part of that. That's what I want to be a part of. So, you know, I take my hat off to what you guys are doing, because this is the beginning of that change.
So how do we continue the conversation, and how do we drive it beyond potential like feelings of it being a trend, or you know, this is current right now and we saw these videos? How do we just keep like blasting through that so that it's not just ends up being this peak of like of interest that a lot of people jumped on? Alice?
I think again, it comes back to culture. I mean, as I said, JCI is an international organization. And so in that respect, it's super inclusive. And when you look at even the award ceremonies, the different backgrounds of those recipients, you know, all the different abilities, the different sexual orientations, just keep that in mind and look at your regional organization and say to yourself, you know, are we continuing that work? Are we taking that that international feeling and making this organization accessible at a local level? I think is super important. And I do agree that we need to make sure that when we're holding things as simple as socials, that it's in a place where maybe you don't always have to dress in business casual to attend. Because just because you don't work again in an office, you know, doesn't mean that you can't bring value to this organization. Quite the opposite. So yeah, I feel like it's just making sure that the organization has a culture of inclusion, that all the members, and especially the leadership of the organization, is making sure that anyone that walks through that door is welcomed.
I think if I can take on to what Alice was saying, I think that's a really interesting point. Like, I know sometimes we can be very formal as an organization, but by our formality, are we being exclusive? In terms of how do we keep having the conversation, it sounds very simplistic. You just keep having the conversation. And really to not treat it as a trend. I think as JCs, we have to do a bit of a mind shift, because we have this 1 year to lead mentality or project to project. And that's not what this is. This is ongoing and this is day to day. You know, there's definitely things where we're looking to, whether it's at a JCI Canada level or an international level, for things to change, like our creed. Or I know yesterday JCI Canada passed a motion to start doing land acknowledgements. That didn't prevent chapters from doing land acknowledgements prior to. So there's still things that we can do at each of our meetings or each of our events that we don't necessarily need to wait for, quote unquote, the powers to be to start enacting change.
True.
I think.
I also think.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I also think that might have said this a little earlier, is that it needs to go beyond just being initiatives and something we focus on right now because it's buzzwords and it's popular, that it needs to come intertwined into everything that we do. So when we are doing planning anything,